So now that we have a class of paragraph that's back to top, now we can identify very specifically these particular images, and we can say that the IMG inside of the class back to top is going to have a certain kind of behavior. Now the reason I'm not calling this an ID is because we're going to use this several times on the page. An ID is only ever supposed to be used one time on a page. A class can be used multiple times, okay? So let's go ahead and write a style for it. First off, I want to show you something. If I go to where it says P back to top and I go to my CSS panel and I tell it to make a new rule, see, it's going to try to do the whole link to. I don't want that because I want it to apply to every one that I'm going to put on the page. So I'm going to just say back to top. The other thing that you can do too, that you should do really, is you should put a P right here. And if you don't put a space where it just says P dot back underscore to underscore top, then what that means is that it's not a class of back to top inside of a P, it's a class of back to top that is applied to a paragraph tag. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tell, let's say that the paragraph, this particular paragraph is going to be a width of, let's say, 4% or something like that. Apply, hit OK, and you notice that it doesn't affect the image inside of it. The image doesn't automatically become 4%. So what we would have to do is tell the image that's inside of that class to be 100% of its parent, which would be 4%. So let's make a new rule now. And let's get rid of this link to, and I'm just going to put P there, so it's any IMG tag that is inside of a class called back to top that is applied to the paragraph tag. And we're going to tell its width to be 100%. And then now you see that it gets really small. So 4% might not be the right size, but let's just say OK and let's save it, and let's just do a little test. Okay, we can save that too. Okay, and then remember we didn't apply it on link 1, we put it on link 2. And see, here's our button. And then the bigger we get, the bigger the button gets. The smaller we get, the smaller the button gets. Now that might be a little bit too small. Alright, so what we might want to do is say, okay, well it's going to get to be a certain size, but then we can do something where it's called a min width. So let's find where our P, yeah, let's take this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it down below. Actually, I'm going to take the articles as well, and I'm going to move them down below section because section comes first. So I'm going to cut that, and then below section, I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so now we've got our articles below the section because that's the same order that it mimics in the HTML. So where it says width is 100%, what I can do for P, because P is the one that has the controlling width, right? This is always going to be 100% of 4%, right? So here's where I can say min width, min dash width, and then I'm going to give it a certain pixel dimension so that it never gets below, let's say, let's do like maybe 30 pixels. And then because it's square, or it doesn't matter if it's square or not, it automatically will keep the ratio. If you just tell it one dimension width, it'll automatically keep the height ratio. Alright, let's save and let's do a quick test. Let's go to link 2, and you see that the button isn't tiny anymore. Alright, so we can say that we always want it to be a certain size, because also on a mobile phone we don't want it to get any smaller. Like, we don't want it to be too small because then it'll be hard to actually click. Okay, well, I'm trying to click it doesn't do anything, right? We need to add an anchor to it, an anchor link that takes us to the top. Okay, so let's jump back over to the source code, and we basically need to make this image clickable. Alright, so you would highlight the image. You could also select the image like this. That's also acceptable in the display view. And then all we have to do, where it says link down here, is we need to tell it to go back to link 1, because remember, link 1 is really where the page starts. So we do pound link1, okay? And then now let's just test it before we do anything with it. And what that did is it wrapped an anchor link tag around it. Alright, so let's save that and let's just do a quick test. Let's go to link 2, and then now if we click back up, works just fine. Okay, so now we know that what we can do is we can take this whole block of code. In fact, let's just, to make things a little bit easier, even though I fixed all of my code and like tried to make it pretty and stuff, you know, Dreamweaver loves to screw things up and reflow it itself. Okay, so I can make it look like this. Alright, so that it's like easy to see what is inside of what. Okay, and then I can take this whole paragraph tag right here with the anchor and the image inside of it. I can copy it, scroll down to link 3, and after the header tag, I give it a couple of returns, paste it, and then same thing in link 4. Okay. Alright, let's save that, and then we can double check it, test it, make sure everything looks okay. And if I scroll down to link 3, I've got my button, works. Scroll down to link 4, got my button, seems to be working just fine. Link 2, working. Okay, so we're pretty good to go. And then as you can see here, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger depending on the size of the page. Now, the last thing that I want to really talk about real quick is this page is pretty big. You might want your page to go that big and you might not. You might have a bunch of graphics inside of here that you don't want to be too gigantic. You know, maybe you don't have high enough resolution, or maybe you just don't want them to be too big, because then if you've got a page full of images, then the page load time is going to be pretty long. So one option that you don't have to do, but that you can do, is that you could say for this section that's 80% of the full screen, the other thing that you could do is you could make sure that it does 80%, but that it maxes out at a certain width and won't go any larger than that. So what you might consider doing is, if you go to your style sheet where it has section and it has width, see down here where we had a minimum width of 30 pixels, and we might even want to change that so that it's like, I don't know, 25 pixels or something like that. We can tell it how wide to be, but we can also give it a minimum or a maximum dimension. So the smallest we ever want this little button to be is 25 pixels. Well, maybe for the section, the widest that we ever want it to be is not always going to be 80% of the browser. Maybe we'll have a max width of, let's say, I don't know, you could say like 1600 pixels or something like that, so that, and you have to make sure you terminate it. By the way, min and max width are not available through the tag options or the styling options in CS6. So just so you're aware of that. So anyway, we can set a max width of, let's say 1600, and I'm on a, let's see, what screen dimension am I on right now? I'm on 1920 dimension. You know what? Because I'm on this dimension, I'm not sure if 80%, you know, I could do the math, but let's just say let's just set it really much smaller. Let's say that like it's 1000 pixels for right now. That's not what I would probably do, but let's say that it's 1000 pixels for its max dimension, and let's test it again. Now you see it's no longer 80%. It hit 1000 pixels and it stopped. And then if I do this, now you see it's 80% again, but once it hits that maximum, right, it hits the maximum of 1000, then it stops getting bigger. So you could also control it that way. What's really important to remember about doing a max width like this is that the max width has to come after your normal percentage width, because it's basically a logical filter. If you tell it to do this first and then you tell it to be 80%, then you've basically overridden this rule, so it doesn't matter for some browsers. So you would tell it the width and percentage, and then you would tell it the max or min that you really want it to be. Okay? You could also set a minimum width as well if you wanted to do that. I don't recommend that really, but I'm not going to get into responsive stuff in terms of like media queries where you can say, okay, well, if the screen size is this size, then do these sets of rules. If it's a different size, then do these. That's a little more advanced. This will be pretty good in terms of working on most devices as long as the stuff that you're putting inside of the rest of the page isn't too odd. Just remember that if you want your images to resize, then what you need to do is sort of like what we did here, where I had a paragraph. It could be something, not a paragraph. It could be some other tag. It could be a div. It could be anything. But basically where you apply a class to it or something, and then you tell it exactly how much space it's supposed to take up on out of its parent, and then the image inside of it can take up 100% of that. Okay, so that's how you control scaling with images. So that's how you could do that again on the page. Something to think about though is if you want to style these buttons differently, if you care how it looks on a mobile device, you need to realize that all of your buttons are just going to look like one big black bar. So if you wanted to create some kind of division in between here, you could do that. What we could try to do here is around the A instead of the actual LI, is we could try to see what it would look like with a border. Here, I'm so used to typing in the code view, so the other thing that we can do is jump up right here and double click that. And first of all, let's make sure that we've got, see how weird it looks in the view of Dreamweaver? It's bizarre. So we'll scroll to the top and maybe it'll show us something up here. You can also click live and maybe it'll be a little bit better of a representation. So let's double click this anchor link option, and then we can go over to where it says border, and let's make it so that it's a solid border, and we're going to make it 1 pixel, and we'll make the color sort of maybe a light gray or something. Okay, and then it adds a border all the way around, but you probably don't want it all the way around. You don't want it on, say, top and bottom. You definitely don't want it on the top. So where it says solid for left and right, you would take same for all off. Okay, and then you would basically take it off the top, say none, and then this doesn't matter if you say none for top, and then probably don't want it for bottom either, say none, apply, and then now you've just got in-betweens. So if you say OK, let's go ahead and test that out. Oh, there we go. Sorry, couldn't find it. Okay, so now at least you've got some borders in between. You don't have to make them so visible if you don't want, but the reason that I think it's important to add that is because, like I said, if you're on a mobile phone, you don't have a hover state. If you're on a tablet, you don't have a hover state. So you don't get this indicator whenever you scroll over it, okay? That's something that's really important to pay attention to if you're trying to do stuff and you care about how it's going to be on a mobile state. Anything that hovers is, I'm not saying it won't work, but it's not going to have the same kind of interactivity that a desktop browser would have. Okay, so a lot of people actually look at things on tablets and phones now, including portfolios, so that's just something to consider if it really matters. If it's really obvious that it's supposed to be a desktop application and that's really how it's supposed to be viewed, then you probably should let people know that, so that it's not something that is intended for a mobile phone if it doesn't have the same interactivity or if it seems to break the interactivity. Okay, so that's the end of this demo for now. Maybe there will be something else later, but for right now this will get you started, and then you can add other content inside of your design much in the same ways that we were adding it.